She didn't cry, didn't speak, didn't beg. She just stood trembling by the tracks, a shadow of frost and fear. When Everett found her, he thought he was saving a stranger. But some silences speak louder than a bullet, and hers would change everything. The girl didn't flinch when the train screamed past. Just stood there, bare feet raw and red in the snow, her hair matted to one side of her face like wind-blown moss. One hand clutched her thin shawl closed over a threadbare dress that wasn't made for January, and the other hung limply at her side. Her lips were blue, her cheeks hollow. She didn't even turn her head when Everett Langston stepped down from his wagon and called out. The horses shifted, restless from the noise of the passing engine, but the girl, she didn't move. Not an inch. Everett felt something cold rise in his throat, something colder than the weather, colder than the ice clinging to his beard. This wasn't just a runaway. She wasn't just lost. She was barely here at all. He moved slow, like you might approach a skittish foal, speaking soft words he couldn't remember afterward. She didn't answer, not once, just kept staring down the tracks like they might deliver something back. A mother, a brother, a chance to undo whatever had happened an hour or a lifetime before. He didn't ask, not yet. He took his coat off without a word and wrapped it around her shoulders. Still nothing, not even a blink, but she let him. And when he reached down, she let him lift her too, and her weight in his arms felt wrong, like picking up something already lost. Light as breath, cold as stone. He laid her gently in the back of the wagon, tucking blankets tight, fingers clumsy with haste. The train was long gone now, just a shadow in the distance, and the only sound left was wind. That and her breathing, thin and quiet, like it hurt to draw in air. Everett clucked to the horses and turned them back toward his cabin, 10 miles off. 10 miles was too far. It always had been, but now it felt like an ocean. The trail back was rough, and more than once the wagon skidded sideways on the ice, but Everett never slowed. He kept glancing over his shoulder, watching for movement, some sign that the girl was still with him, still tethered to this world. She never spoke, never asked where they were going, just stared up at the sky with eyes too hollow for her age. 16, maybe. 17 at most. But she looked like someone who'd seen too much and said too little. By the time the cabin came into view, Everett's hands were raw from the reins and his pulse hammered in his ears. He carried her inside like a father would carry a fevered child, gentle, but scared down to the bone. The warmth hit them in a wave. Everett had stoked the fire high that morning before heading out to check the northern fence line. He hadn't expected to be back so soon. He hadn't expected her. He laid her down on the cot closest to the hearth, stripped the damp from her limbs, and wrapped her again in wool. Still nothing. No protest. No sound. Just that same awful quiet. It wasn't until hours later, after the stew boiled and the storm picked up again outside, that she moved. Just a twitch of the hand. Everett saw it from across the room and froze. She didn't open her eyes, didn't sit up. But her fingers curled slightly against the blanket like she was reaching for something or someone that wasn't there. And that was the first moment Everett let himself admit he was terrified. He'd seen death, held it, dug graves for it, but this girl, this was different. She wasn't gone, not yet, but it was like she didn't know how to stay. He kept watch all night, slept in the chair with his boots still on, a rifle across his lap out of old habit. Wolves had been sighted further south, and Everett didn't trust the wind. Morning came slow and gray, seeping through the shutters like a secret. The girl hadn't moved again. Everett made coffee, checked the traps, and came back to find her staring at him with those same empty eyes. He stopped mid-step. She didn't look afraid, just resigned, as if even kindness couldn't be trusted anymore. "Name S. Everett," he said quietly. "Everett Langston, you're safe here." She blinked once, then turned her head to the fire, nothing more. He didn't ask her name. He wanted to, but something about the weight she carried told him not yet, maybe not ever. So he let the silence stretch between them like a drawbridge. He cooked, brought her broth, mended the old fence line when the snow let up. She watched, always watched, like she was waiting for him to change, to show the same face as whoever had left her by the tracks. But Everett didn't change. He just kept being there. On the fourth morning she spoke, one word, Clara, soft, barely a sound, but it cut through the quiet like a bell through fog. Everett looked up from where he was splitting kindling and nodded. "All right, Clara," he said. "You let me know if there's anything else you need." She didn't answer, but her eyes followed him now. That was something. The day stretched on, slow and thick with snow. Everett didn't push. He'd known silence before, had lived in it for years after his own daughter died. But this silence was different. Clara wasn't hiding in hers. She was trapped inside it. He saw it in the way she flinched when the shutters banged, the way she curled up tight when the wind howled through the chimney. She never asked for food, never asked to go outside, never asked anything at all. But every day she got a little warmer, a little more present. Until the night he heard her cry. It was just a sound at first, barely more than a breath, but Everett sat up fast, the chair groaning beneath him. She was turned to the wall, her shoulders shaking in the dark. He didn't move, didn't speak, just let her cry, let her get it out. It was the kind of crying that didn't belong to one thing. It wasn't just sadness. It was grief and rage and terror all tangled into one. It lasted hours, and when it finally stopped, she slept deeper than he'd seen her sleep yet. The next morning she ate 2 whole biscuits without prompting, looked him in the eye for the first time. And that's when Everett knew she hadn't just been lost. She'd been running from something, maybe someone, and it wasn't over. That night, just as Everett was bolting the door, Clara stood up for the first time since she'd arrived. "They'll come," she whispered. Her voice was raw and certain. Everett turned slowly. "Who?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Clara's eyes met his. "The ones who left me." She didn't blink. "They'll come back." And Everett felt it deep and sudden, the shift in the air. The past wasn't done with Clara. It had only just begun to catch up. Everett didn't sleep that night. Not really. His body might have slumped in the chair, boots kicked off and head tilted back, but his ears stayed open, eyes half-lidded and drifting toward the girl curled up on the cot each time the wind shifted. "They'll come." That's what she'd said. Not they might, they will. It wasn't a warning. It was a certainty, spoken not with fear, but with the cold resignation of someone who'd seen enough of life to know when danger made promises, it kept them. Everett had trusted his gut for most of his life, and that gut told him Clara wasn't wrong. By morning he was already outside before sunrise, axe in hand, splitting and stacking what little dry wood he had left. The storm had passed, but the cold hadn't. It bit at his fingers and turned the sweat down his back to ice. He checked the shed, the barn, the root cellar, took count of every ration, every cartridge, every bolt and hinge on the cabin door. He wasn't a paranoid man, not usually. But there was something about the way Clara had said it, "They'll come," that stuck in his chest like a nail. She hadn't spoken another word since. Hadn't needed to. The silence between them now wasn't awkward or heavy. It was charged, waiting. Clara didn't eat much that day, just nibbled at the corner of a biscuit as she sat watching the tree line. Her eyes didn't scan like someone enjoying the view. They scanned like someone expecting movement. Everett wanted to ask, wanted to know what kind of hell had dumped her on the tracks like that. But every time he got close to saying it, he stopped. He'd lived long enough to know when a person was holding something they couldn't yet put down. Words were like wounds. You didn't tear off the bandage just to look. You waited until the bleeding slowed. The second night passed without incident, though the wolves howled closer than before. Clara barely slept. She sat up most of the night, knees drawn to her chest, flinching at every distant cry. Everett kept the fire high and the rifle loaded. He didn't press her, just stayed near, making sure the shadows didn't get too long. She didn't speak again, not that night. But the next morning something shifted. She followed him out to the barn without being asked. Didn't say a word, but carried the empty pail and held the door open as he checked on the mare. She even helped brush the ice from the trough, though her hands trembled so hard she had to stop every few strokes. Everett handed her his gloves. She didn't thank him, but she wore them. It was the first time she'd accepted anything from him without hesitation. Later, as they sat on the porch drinking the bitter coffee Everett always made too strong, Clara finally spoke again. Just 2 words this time. "My sister." Her voice was barely above the wind, but it hit Everett harder than a shout. He didn't look at her, just waited. "She's 10, Clara continued, fingers wrapped around the tin cup like it might anchor her. "They took her." Her voice didn't tremble, but her knuckles turned white. Everett said nothing. Let her go on. "There were 3 of them," she said after a long silence. 2 men, 1 woman. They came through our town last week, said they were looking for work, said they had family out west. Mama gave them soup, let them sleep in the barn. By morning our mule was gone, so was Emmy." Her eyes were far away now, staring at something Everett couldn't see. "I ran after them, took Pa's boots, followed the tracks until they faded. Then the snow came. I kept walking anyway." Everett clenched his jaw. He'd heard stories like this before, towns trusting the wrong strangers, kindness mistaken for weakness. But this one felt different, felt close. The way Clara told it, flat and even, with no anger, no tears, it was like the grief had burned her hollow already, left only facts behind. She'd survived on rage and ice, and now all she had left was the mission: find Emmy. "You got names?" Everett asked finally. Clara shook her head. The woman had red hair, scar across her cheek. One of the men had a limp, the other one. She paused. He smiled too much. That was all she said, but it was enough. Everett didn't need more. He'd lived near enough to the tracks to know the kind of folks who passed through when nobody was watching. He could guess the rest. They spent the day preparing. Clara didn't ask if she could stay. Everett didn't offer. They just moved in rhythm, unspoken understanding settling in like dust. She boiled water while he sharpened the tools. She cleaned the rifle while he cut meat into strips. She was quick, precise, methodical. This wasn't her first brush with danger. That night Clara unrolled a map on the table. Everett leaned in. Her fingers pointed to the spot where she'd last seen tracks, then to where she thought they might be headed. "They asked about the old rail camp near Cragstone," she said. "Folks said there's still miners squatting out that way, maybe worse." Everett nodded. He knew the place. Half-burnt shacks and a dry well. Good spot for someone wanting to vanish. Bad spot for anyone trying to walk in alone. "It's 4 days' ride," he muttered. "If they hole up, we'll need to get there quiet." Clara nodded. She didn't ask if he was coming. That, too, felt understood. He offered her the cot that night, but she shook her head. "I'll stay near the door." Everett didn't argue. She curled up against the wall, blanket pulled to her chin, a knife clutched in one hand beneath the folds. She didn't trust safety, not yet. Maybe not ever. Everett understood. Trust was a thing earned in moments, not offered by shelter or firelight. By morning they were packed. 2 rifles, 3 weeks' rations, Everett's mare, and the old mule he'd sworn was too stubborn to die. They didn't say goodbye to the cabin. They just left, the wind already rising behind them like a breath held too long. As they rode, Everett found himself glancing over more often than he meant to. Watching the way Clara sat her horse like she'd been born to it. Watching the way her eyes never stopped scanning the trees. She wasn't a child anymore. Maybe she never had been. That first night on the trail, they camped beneath an outcropping of stone. Clara built the fire while Everett took first watch. They didn't talk much, but sometime after midnight she spoke again. "If I don't find her," she whispered, staring into the flames, "I don't know who I'll be." Everett didn't respond right away. Then slowly he said, "Then we'll make sure you do." The wind carried away the rest of the night's words, but the promise stayed, hung between them like smoke. The next day they saw signs. A small campfire still smoldering, boot prints near a stream, a button caught on a low branch. Everett didn't say what he was thinking, but Clara knew. They were close, too close. That evening they reached the edge of Cragstone. What was left of it, anyway. And just beyond the first broken shack someone was watching, a figure with a rifle, a limp, a smile too wide to be real. The smile didn't fade when the man stepped forward. If anything, it grew wider, stretched across his face like it had been carved there with a dull blade. He leaned against the doorframe of the collapsed shack, rifle resting easy in his arms, but there was nothing lazy about the way he stood. His eyes were sharp, calculating. He wasn't surprised to see them. He'd been expecting someone. Maybe not them specifically, but someone, some reckoning. That much was clear. Clara didn't move, didn't breathe. Her whole body seemed to turn to stone beside Everett, her eyes locked on that face. The limp, the grin, it was him, one of them, one of the three who'd taken her sister. Everett felt her hand twitch near her coat, not toward a weapon, toward a memory. He reached out slowly and placed his palm against her shoulder, grounding her without a word. They weren't here for a standoff. Not yet. Not unless they had to be. "Well now," the man called out, his voice too bright for the dead place around them. "Ain't every day we get visitors this far out. What brings you to Cragstone?" His boots crunched in the snow as he stepped forward, but the rifle didn't leave his hands. Clara said nothing. Everett cleared his throat. "Looking for someone," he said evenly. "Girl about 10, dark hair, might have come through with a group." The man tilted his head, the grin flickering. "Ain't seen no girl," he lied too quickly. "Just us out here, miners mostly, folks trying to stay warm, keep quiet." He took another step, just one, but it was enough to tighten every muscle in Everett's back. "You're a bit off track if you're looking for kin. Nothing but ghosts out this way." Clara stepped forward, just one step, but her voice when it came was steady and clear. "Where is she?" The man's smile vanished, like a switch flipped. His eyes narrowed, and for the first time he really looked at her, and Everett saw something pass through his expression then. Recognition, guilt, fear, maybe all three. "You," he muttered. Clara's hand went to the knife at her side. Everett stepped between them. "We don't want trouble," he said. "Just the girl. If she's here, we take her and we go. No questions, no law." The man hesitated, just long enough to betray something. Then he backed up a step and spit into the snow. "You should leave," he said, voice darker now. "Ain't safe here, not for her, not for you." He turned and disappeared into the shadows of the ruined town. Clara made to follow, but Everett grabbed her arm firm. "No," he said, "not like this." "There's no time," she snapped, her voice breaking for the first time since she'd arrived at his cabin. "They'll move her, or worse. We don't know how many are here. We go in blind, we don't come out. You want to get her back. We do it smart." She wanted to argue. He could see it in her eyes, but she didn't. She just looked past him toward the shacks, toward the figure swallowed by shadow, and nodded once. They set up camp a mile out in a thicket behind a ridge that gave them a view of the ruined town. Cragstone was barely more than splinters and stone now, a skeleton of what it once was, but people still moved there. Shadows flickering in firelight, outlines shifting between buildings. Everett counted 6, maybe more, men and women both, all armed, all cautious. This wasn't a settlement, it was a nest. For 2 days they watched, waited. Clara didn't sleep. Everett caught her pacing at night, muttering under her breath, eyes never leaving the ridge. On the 3rd morning they saw her, Emmy. She was being led from one shack to another, bundled in a too-big coat, hair tangled and face dirty, but unmistakably her. She didn't cry, didn't fight, just walked with her head down, shoulders hunched. Everett watched Clara's breath catch. Her hands trembled, but she didn't move, not yet. She waited, just like he'd taught her. That night Everett laid out the plan. "You go in quiet, through the back shack on the east side. I'll draw their attention toward the mine entrance. Give you time." "What if they catch you?" she asked. "They won't. And if they do, then you run." She didn't like it, but she nodded. The next day, everything went wrong. It started fine. Everett crept through the trees at dawn, stirring up noise near the old mine shaft, drawing 2 of the guards out. He lobbed a rock down the shaft for good measure, made it echo like thunder. They took the bait. Clara moved fast, slipping through the shadows, reaching the shack where she'd seen her sister. But when she opened the door, it was empty. They demoved her. Too late, Everett saw it, the trap. The man with the limp stepped out of the shadows, rifle raised. Clara froze. He smiled again. "Too slow," he said. But he never saw Everett coming. The old rancher tackled him from behind, sending the rifle flying. They hit the ground hard. Snow exploded around them. Everett's fist connected once, twice, before the man kicked free and scrambled up. Clara was already moving, knife in hand, but the limp man whistled sharp, once, twice, and within seconds the whole place lit up. Gunfire cracked through the air. Clara ducked behind the shack, Everett diving beside her. "They've got lookouts," he hissed. "No time," she said. "They're moving her again." "How do you know?" "Because they did it to me." Everett stared at her. "You?" Clara didn't explain, just ran. He followed. They raced through the ruins, ducking between walls and burned-out cabins. Footsteps thundered behind them, voices shouting. A bullet tore through Everett's coat. Another splintered the wall beside Clara's head. She didn't flinch, just kept going. They reached the far edge of Cragstone, and there she was, Emmy, being dragged by a red-haired woman with a pistol and a mouth full of curses. Clara didn't hesitate. She screamed her sister's name and charged. The red-haired woman turned, gun rising, but Everett fired first. The shot rang out like judgment. The woman dropped. Clara was already there, arms around Emmy, holding her like she could press all the missing days out of her bones. Emmy sobbed once, then went silent, burying her face in her sister's neck. Everett did lower the rifle. The danger wasn't over. Not by a long shot. One by one the others appeared, men with rifles, knives, ropes. They weren't backing down. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a war now. Clara stood, Emmy behind her, knife in hand again. "We're not leaving," she said. "You hear me? You don't get to keep her." The man with the limp stepped forward, blood trickling from his lip. "You think this ends here?" he spat. "You think taking her back fixes anything? You took something from us too." Everett cocked the rifle. "I'll take more if you don't step aside." A long silence stretched between them. And then the man laughed. Not loud, not wild, just a slow, bitter chuckle that spread like smoke. He didn't move, just pointed down the hill. That's when Everett saw it. More riders, 4, 5, maybe more, kicking up snow as they came from the south. They weren't part of this camp, different horses, different guns. But they were coming fast. And Clara turned toward Everett with eyes wide, not in fear, but fury. "We're surrounded," she said. The riders didn't slow as they came, didn't hesitate. They swept in from the south like a dust storm made of horseflesh and gunmetal, cutting through the valley with grim purpose, faces obscured by scarves and wind. Clara grabbed Emmy and backed toward Everett, her hand clutched so tight around her sister's she left half-moon indentations in the child's wrist. "Not theirs," she said under her breath, voice low, urgent. "Those aren't their men." Everett squinted through the gray light. She was right. These newcomers weren't part of the Cragstone camp. Their gear was different, cleaner, newer. Their movements too controlled, too precise. Trained, organized, that made them worse. The man with the limp stepped back, just barely enough to show even he hadn't expected this. "Hell is this now?" he growled. Everett didn't answer. He didn't know, but whatever it was bad. The new riders fanned out in a half-circle. No introductions, no warnings. Their leader, a man with silver hair tied back at his neck and a long black duster, raised his gloved hand, and the others dismounted with synchronized ease. Not outlaws, not exactly. This wasn't how bandits moved. This wasn't chaos. This was methodical. Then the leader spoke. Clara Bellwether. Her name landed like a bullet. Clara went rigid beside Everett, her breath catching in her throat. The man didn't wait for a reply. "You're coming with us." Clara's knife came up again, but Everett stepped between them. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. The silver-haired man removed his glove slowly, held it in his hand like it was a symbol or maybe a warning. "Name S. Bram Holt. These men are hired under government charter. We've been tracking the Bellwether girl for 78 miles. Clara's face twisted. "Government," she spat. "You work for my father." Bram Holt didn't blink. "We work for what's left of his estate. You're a ward of the territory, and that child," he pointed at Emmy, "is unlawfully in your custody." "You're lying," Clara snapped. "I don't need to lie," Bram said simply. Your father's dead. His debts aren't. And neither are the contracts he signed trying to save your family name. The words didn't register right away. Clara stood in silence, the knife still in her hand but suddenly limp. Her father, dead. Everett looked from her to Holt, then to the riders flanking him. All armed, all calm. This wasn't just some private retrieval. This was sanctioned. Clara took a single step backward. You're not taking her. She's not yours to keep, Holt replied and gestured. Two men stepped forward slowly, hands near their guns. Emmy whimpered and pressed closer to her sister. Clara shook her head once, twice, as if trying to physically push the truth out of her skull. You don't understand. She's my sister. She's your half-sister, Holt corrected coldly. Daughter of your father's mistress, born out of scandal, hidden until he tried to disappear the both of you. We've got documents, girl, signed and sealed. She's a child, Clara screamed. She doesn't belong in papers. But Holt was unmoved. Neither do debts, but here we are. And Everett understood. Clara hadn't been running from strangers. She'd been running from the law, or what men like Holt twisted the law into: contracts, signatures, blood money dressed in wax seals and false custody papers. The men she'd escaped with weren't just kidnappers. They were hired hands, contract enforcers, not by the state, but by family with power and no soul left in it. The gunmen kept closing in. Everett raised his rifle slow. You come any closer, he warned, and you'll be drawing your last breath. Holt raised a brow. You plan to stand against the law, mister? Langston, Everett replied, and I've stood against worse than men with badges and half-truths. One of Holt's men pulled his gun. Everett fired first. The bullet caught the man in the thigh. He went down screaming. And chaos erupted. Holt ducked, shouting orders. Two of his riders moved for cover. Another fired wildly toward Clara, missing by inches as Everett dragged her down. Emmy sobbed. Her hands clamped over her ears as bullets tore through the brush, and the broken frame of Cragstone splintered with each blast. Clara covered Emmy with her body, whispering her name over and over like a shield of words. Everett reloaded. Clara grabbed a fallen pistol from one of the enforcers and returned fire, her hands shaking but her aim deadly. Another man fell. Holt cursed. Hold your fire, he bellowed, but the damage was done. The man with the limp still crouched nearby laughed, actually laughed. Looks like your friends don't want her either, he sneered at Holt. Guess that means she's fair game. Clara turned toward him, gun raised, and shot him through the shoulder. He spun backward into the snow with a strangled cry. She's not a game, she said. Everett pulled her behind cover. We need to move, now. But they'll keep coming, she gasped. They won't stop. Then we keep going faster. The Cragstone gang, disoriented by the sudden fight, began to retreat toward the mine entrance. Holt's remaining men regrouped near their horses, dragging their wounded with them. Nobody had won. Not yet, but nobody had lost either. Not yet. Everett grabbed the reins of the nearest mount and swung Emmy up into the saddle, then boosted Clara after her. We ride north, through the pines. Rivers iced over should buy us time. What about you? Clara demanded. I'll catch up. You better. He fired 2 more shots to keep Holt's men down, then vaulted onto his own horse, whistling sharp. They galloped north, snow flying behind them, bullets still cracking through the wind but growing more distant by the second. Clara held Emmy tight. Everett led them through thickets and over ridgelines, never stopping long enough to let fear catch up. By nightfall, they reached a ridge overlooking the frozen river. Everett called a halt. We camp here, he said. They'll be slower through the trees. Clara didn't argue. She just pulled Emmy close and sat down by the fire. The girl hadn't spoken in hours. Her face was pale, her eyes distant. She looked the way Clara had looked that first day by the tracks. Frozen, hollow. Everett knelt beside her. You're safe now, he said gently. But Emmy didn't answer. Later, after the fire had burned low and Emmy finally slept curled between them, Clara stared into the dark. "They weren't supposed to find us," she whispered. "I had a plan. I was going to bring her west, start over, change our names. I didn't think." She stopped, bit her lip, shook her head. "I didn't know he was dead," she finished. Everett stirred the coals. "And now?" Clara met his eyes. "Now it doesn't matter, because they're still coming, whether he's dead or not. Someone still wants her. Someone still owns a piece of paper that says they can." Everett nodded slowly. "Then we burn the paper." She blinked. "What?" "Not literally, but whatever claim they think they have, it's only real if you let it be. We go further west, get across the canyon. After that, there's no one left who will come looking, not where we're going." Clara stared at him. "You'd really do that? Give up your place, your land, your home for us?" Everett looked back at the fire. His jaw tightened. "I gave up home a long time ago. Didn't know it until you showed up." She didn't speak, didn't need to. The silence said enough. And just as the fire began to die, a branch cracked. Everett shot to his feet. But it was Holt. It wasn't his men. It was a boy. No older than 13, thin, blood on his shirt, eyes wide and wild. "They're coming," he rasped. "They took my ma, took her west." Clara rose. "Who?" The boy looked at her, eyes full of something too big for words. "I think they're taking all of us." The boy collapsed before he could say anything more. Clara caught him as he fell, lowering him gently to the frozen ground. His skin was like paper, translucent with cold, and his breath came shallow and fast. Everett was already unbuckling his coat, wrapping it around the boy's small frame as the firelight caught on the streak of blood trailing down his side. A gash, shallow but long, ran from his ribs to his hip. The bleeding had slowed, crusted black around the edges, but it had been enough to sap him near dry. Clara pressed a strip of cloth to the wound, her hands working without hesitation. "I've got him," she said, already shifting Emmy out of the way to make room beside the fire. Emmy blinked sleepily, still groggy from exhaustion and fear, but didn't ask questions. She simply moved, watching Clara work with quiet reverence. Everett threw more kindling into the fire, shielding the flame from the wind with his back. The boy's eyes fluttered open as Clara wiped his brow. "They had wagons," he whispered. "Big ones, covered like circuses, but not." Clara leaned close. "How many?" "Don't know," he said. They took us in the night, said we were being relocated, said it was safe." He choked back a sob. "Ma didn't believe 'em. She ran, so they hit her. I ran too. I don't think she—" he broke off, curling into himself. Clara looked at Everett. "This isn't just about Emmy." "No," Everett said grimly. "It never was." The boy's name was Jacob. He came from a homestead 3 ridges east, a cluster of families trying to outlast the winter together in the old hunting cabins. It had been quiet, isolated, forgotten by most, until a week ago when the covered wagons arrived with promises of safety, food, and transport to a new settlement further west. They had papers, stamps, even a marshal's signature. But no one ever saw that marshal. Just his name, always printed, never signed. "They said it was part of the agreement," Jacob muttered through cracked lips. "Said they'd been paid already, that the land was owed. Some called it a debt, others called it relocation. All I know is, once you got on the wagon, you didn't come back." He fell asleep soon after, exhaustion pulling him under like a tide. Clara sat back, arms folded tightly across her chest, her face hard. "They're not just taking children," she said. "They're taking families, settlers, anyone without someone to come looking." Everett nodded. "And someone's paying for it." They didn't sleep much that night. Each sound in the woods drew a twitch, a hand to a weapon, a glance toward the darkness. Morning came with no warmth, just a gray sheet of sky and frost on every surface. Clara made broth for Jacob, feeding him in slow sips. He stirred but didn't wake fully. By midday, Emmy was the one who spoke first. "We can't let them take anyone else." Clara turned surprised. I don't want to run anymore, the girl said quietly, staring at her shoes. If we just keep running, they'll find more kids like Jacob, more moms like ours. Clara knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from Emmy's cheek. You're not wrong, she said, but fighting them means risk. Emmy nodded, so. The simplicity of the answer was almost too much. Clara closed her eyes just for a moment, then she stood. We stop running, she said. We find where they're taking everyone, and we end it. It was Everett who suggested where to begin. There's a canyon pass west of here, he said. Only way you'd move a caravan that size through the mountains. If they're going anywhere remote, they'll pass through it. Do you know it? Clara asked. He nodded, camped near it once. There's an overlook steep but climbable. From there we can see the whole trail for miles. They left that afternoon, riding fast with Jacob slung across Everett's saddle, wrapped tight in wool. Emmy rode with Clara, her arms around her sister's waist, head tucked against her back. They stopped only to water the horses and check the boys' breathing. By dusk they reached the ridge. The wind howled harder up high. Trees thinned and snow turned the trail to ice, but Everett pressed forward until they reached a rocky ledge overlooking the canyon mouth. Below in the dying light they saw them. 5 wagons, covered in canvas, the kind used by traveling shows and military trains, each pulled by 2 heavy horses, guards on all sides, some on horseback, some walking with rifles. No flags, no banners, just blank white cloth tied over the sides, and people, dozens of them walking in chains or tied together with ropes, flanked by riders with whips and long sticks. Children, women, old men too slow to keep up. Clara's breath hitched. There, Emmy whispered, pointing. One wagon's canvas had slipped. Inside were cages, not crates, cages. Everett's stomach turned. This isn't debt collection, he said. This is trafficking. Clara rose to her feet, fists clenched. We burn it all. Everett hesitated. We don't know how many guards there are, if they've got hired guns like Holt's men. We'll need help, Clara said. Real help. It was Jacob who offered the answer when he woke the next morning. The miners, he said weakly, south of Dry Fork. They hate the caravans, say they steal food, water. Maybe if you tell them what's really going on. It was a long shot, but it was something. Everett and Clara rode south, leaving Emmy and Jacob hidden in a rock shelter near the ridge with what food they could spare. Clara left Emmy her knife. Only use it if you have to, she said. Emmy nodded. The ride to Dry Fork took half a day. The mining camp wasn't much, just a scattering of tents and a few battered shacks built into the cliffside. But the men there were hard, suspicious, and angry. They didn't trust strangers. Clara stood in front of them anyway, voice clear and strong. They're taking settlers, she said. Families, kids, putting them in cages and calling it justice. And if you let them keep doing it, they'll come for you too. Some laughed, others turned away. But one man, thick with soot and arms like tree trunks, stepped forward. I saw 'em, he said. Week ago, they came through, took my cousin, said he owed tax for the land. We were born here, ain't never paid a dime. Clara met his eyes. Help us stop them. He looked around, spat once. I'll get the others. By dusk they had 20 men, not trained but willing. Miners, ranchers, a few who'd fought in old wars. Everett handed out what weapons he could spare. The rest brought shovels, picks, axes. They rode with fire in their blood. That night the caravan camped at the river crossing. By morning, everything would burn. They waited until the coldest hour before dawn, the kind of cold that makes steel crack and wood groan. Everett stood just beyond the tree line, boots buried in snow, eyes locked on the faint orange flicker of the caravan's campfires. Below, the 5 wagons sat like slumbering beasts in the gully, guard posts at each corner, men smoking, horses restless, and behind them bound figures huddled beneath stretched canvas, shapes too small to be grown men, too still to be sleeping easy. Clara crouched beside him, face pale, eyes sharper than ever. Her hand never left the hilt of her pistol. Behind them the miners waited, 21 in all now, spread wide through the trees, armed with everything from hunting rifles to pickaxes wrapped in barbed wire. No one spoke. Not anymore. All the words had been said. Everett glanced once at Clara. "We won't get a better chance." She nodded once. "We don't leave without them." He raised his hand, and from the left flank, 2 of the miners began the distraction. They pushed a barrel filled with dry kindling and oil down the frozen slope. It slammed against a rock and burst, fire licking up its sides as it tumbled toward the camp. By the time the guards turned, the rest of the group had moved. Gunfire cracked like lightning. Miners opened fire from the trees, forcing the guards to scramble for cover. The first to fall was the man stationed by the horses. He dropped hard, rifle spinning into the snow. Another shot rang out and one of the caravan wheels exploded, sending canvas flying. Screams rose, shouts of confusion, of anger. Clara didn't wait. She charged downhill, Everett at her heels. A guard rose to meet her, and she fired once, clean and fast, dropping him before he could lift his weapon. Another tried to intercept Everett with a knife, but the old rancher barreled through him with the butt of his rifle, sending him crashing to the ground. They reached the first wagon. Everett tore open the flap. Inside were 3 girls, no older than 10, chained at the ankles but wide-eyed and awake. Clara didn't hesitate. She cut the bindings with a blade she'd hidden in her boot and helped them out one by one, shielding their heads from stray bullets. "Run east," she told them. "Up the hill, you'll find friends there. Tell them Clara sent you." They obeyed without question, darting into the trees. By then the guards had regrouped. One yelled something in a language Everett didn't understand, and 2 mounted riders began circling wide, trying to flank. But the miners had planned for that. A cluster of men stepped forward with logs and wire, creating a crude blockade. The horses balked. One reared and threw its rider. Clara and Everett moved to the second wagon. A man was already waiting, big, broad, eyes empty. He swung an iron rod toward Clara's head. Everett caught it with his forearm, the blow jarring every bone in his body, but he didn't let go. Clara shot once, then twice. The second bullet caught the man in the leg, sending him sprawling. Everett kicked him hard before pulling the latch open. More children, this time younger. One boy didn't move. Clara climbed in and lifted him gently. "He's breathing," she said, "barely." "We need to end this," Everett muttered. "Now." And that's when the scream came, from behind. Clara spun, eyes wide. Emmy. The girl had run from the ridge. She wasn't supposed to. She was supposed to stay with Jacob. But there she was, stumbling into the clearing, her small frame lit by firelight, screaming as a man reached for her. Clara fired without thinking. The bullet hit the man square in the chest. He fell backwards, arms flailing, landing hard in the snow. Emmy collapsed beside him, sobbing. Clara ran to her, grabbing her shoulders. "What are you doing? I told you to stay back." "They're taking Jacob," Emmy gasped. "Someone took him. I heard him scream. I tried to stop them, but—" Everett's blood turned to ice. This wasn't the only caravan. This was a diversion. A decoy. And the real one was already moving further west. He turned, scanning the tree line. Sure enough, in the far distance, barely visible, were the shapes of 3 more wagons, smaller, faster, already ascending a narrow pass through the rocks. One figure rode ahead, coat snapping in the wind. "Bram Holt." "Clara," Everett said, voice low and grim, "he's got Jacob." She turned slowly, her face unreadable. And then she stood. "I'll go." "No," Everett said, "we both go." She hesitated. "The kids." "The miners have them now. They'll protect them. But Jacob, if they cross the ridge, we lose them. We lose him." Clara looked down at Emmy. Stay here, stay with the others. Emmy shook her head violently. No, please don't leave me. You're not alone anymore, Clara whispered. You're safe now. And then they ran. The path was narrow and steep. Snow turned to ice beneath their boots, but they didn't stop, not once. Holt's caravan moved fast, but not fast enough. They could still see the flicker of lanterns, the creak of wagon wheels on stone. By the time Everett and Clara reached the ridgeline, the last wagon was vanishing behind a wall of pine. Clara didn't wait. She mounted a loose horse abandoned by the miners, Everett doing the same. They rode without words, following the wagon ruts, ducking low branches, ducking fear. They caught up just after nightfall. The wagons had stopped by a narrow river, shallow but fast, crossing into a gulch beyond. Holt stood by the lead wagon, speaking to a man Everett didn't recognize, older, gray-bearded, dressed like a preacher. They argued briefly, the preacher holding a stack of papers, Holt pointing toward the cages. Jacob was in one of them. Chained. Bleeding. Barely conscious. Clara slid off her horse. I'm going in, she whispered. You won't get far, Everett replied. They'll shoot on sight. Then give them something else to shoot at. And without another word, she rose and walked into the firelight. Holt turned instantly, gun drawn. Back again, he snarled. You don't know when to die. Clara didn't flinch. Let him go. You have no claim, Holt snapped. He's marked same as all of them. This is legal. You keep using that word like it means something, she said, and drew her gun. But she wasn't aiming at Holt. She was aiming at the preacher's papers. One shot. The entire stack ignited. The preacher screamed, slapping at the flames. And Everett moved. He rode straight into the camp, knocking over a guard and leaping from the saddle as he reached Jacob's cage. One shot took out the lock. Another grazed his arm, but he didn't stop. He grabbed the boy and lifted him, running back toward the trees. Clara fired again, dropping a second guard. But Holt had taken cover. Shoot them, he bellowed. And his men obeyed. Everett staggered behind a wagon shielding Jacob with his body. Clara ducked behind a tree, reloading. Gunfire lit the sky. Horses screamed. Wood splintered. But then shouts. From the trees. The miners. They followed. Holt's men didn't stand a chance. It was over in minutes. Holt tried to run. Clara found him at the river. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She just raised her gun. He looked at her, eyes wide. Please. She fired. He fell. The water carried him away. Everett sat beside Jacob, cradling the boy's head as the miners gathered around. Clara joined them, blood on her sleeve, smoke in her hair. She knelt beside her sister and held her tight. It was done. For now. But the wind still howled. And in the distance, the fire still burned. The last wagon burned slow, like it didn't want to admit the end had come. Flames curled up the canvas and snapped through the wooden spokes, smoke pouring into the early dawn sky in long gray ribbons. Clara stood in the clearing with her arms around Emmy, eyes locked on the fire like it owed her something more than ash. Behind her, Everett crouched beside Jacob, adjusting the boy's makeshift bandage with care born not just of caution, but of something quieter. Respect. Love maybe, though he wouldn't have said it out loud. The miners gathered their dead, 3 men lost, 5 wounded, but none complained, not when they saw what they'd saved. Women with bruises around their wrists, children who'd forgotten how to cry. One old man who couldn't remember his own name but wept when Clara took his hand and simply said, "You're safe now." No one asked what happened to Holt. No one wanted the answer. They'd seen Clara return with the gun still smoking in her palm, her face unreadable, her shoulders squared like someone who had walked through fire and come out the other side scorched, but standing. She didn't offer an explanation, and Everett didn't press. There were things in this world that didn't need retelling. For the rest of that day they worked. The wagons were dismantled, chains cut, horses freed. The papers, the ones the preacher had clung to like scripture, were piled into the snow and set alight. When the flames reached high enough, Clara took one of the seals from the pile, still warm, and dropped it into the frozen river. The wax hissed and vanished beneath the surface. "No one owns us anymore," she said. Jacob was still weak, but the color had returned to his cheeks. He didn't speak much. But when Everett offered him a sip from his canteen and ruffled his hair, the boy managed a smile that lit something deep in Everett's chest. A part of him that had gone quiet years ago stirred awake. "We can't stay here," Clara said later, once the worst of the fires had gone out. "They'll come again. Others. There's always another name on the paper, another man with a badge and a lie." Everett nodded. "Then we go." "Where?" He looked to the west, where the sun now cracked the mountaintops with light. "As far as the land takes us." The group split in twos and threes. Some of the miners returned home, promising to spread word about what had happened. Others chose to come along, following Everett and Clara through the narrow pass toward land still untouched by the rot that had nearly swallowed them. They moved slow at first. Jacob couldn't ride far without rest, and Emmy had grown quiet again, wary of every noise in the trees, but they moved together, and that mattered more than speed. They crossed the river by foot, shoes tied around their necks, the cold biting enough to remind them they were alive. Every footstep forward felt earned. Clara led with Emmy always at her side, her hand never far from the knife she kept now in her boot. Everett rode ahead some days, scouting the trail, eyes peeled for trouble, but most of the time he stayed near Jacob. "You ever learn to shoot?" he asked the boy one afternoon, handing him a small, broken-stock pistol. Jacob looked at it with wide eyes. "No, sir." "Well," Everett said, "you will." The days bled into one another. They passed through long stretches of pine and snow-packed valley, slept under open stars, shared what little food they could hunt or trade, and slowly the silence faded. Emmy began to hum again. Jacob laughed once, just once, when Clara nearly fell trying to catch a rabbit. Everett smiled more, not often, not wide, but enough. Weeks passed. Then came the ridge. They found it just before dusk, a high cliff overlooking a green basin beyond, untouched by fences or smoke. A river curved through it like a silver ribbon, and hills rolled out on either side like open arms. The place looked like it had never been claimed. No markers, no boots, just land, wide and waiting. Everett didn't speak for a long time. Clara came to stand beside him. "It's beautiful." "It's home," he said. She looked at him. "You sure?" "No," he admitted, "but it could be." They camped there that night, built fires, shared bread. Clara found a flat stretch of land near the ridge and said, "We could build something here." Everett raised an eyebrow. "Cabin?" he asked. "Schoolhouse," she said, then laughed. "Maybe both." The next day they began. It started with clearing land, dragging deadwood, shaping logs. Everett showed Jacob how to notch timbers. Clara taught Emmy how to gut fish. The work was hard and it didn't always go right. One beam snapped, one fire went out, but no one gave up. They kept building. Word spread. Weeks later, 2 more families arrived, one from a northern valley, another from the edge of Dry Fork. They'd heard of the caravan, of Holt, of Clara Bellwether, the girl who burned the law to the ground and called it justice. They asked if they could stay. Clara said yes. By summer, there were 6 homes in the basin, a shared garden, a schoolhouse with no desks yet, just blankets and books and children eager to learn. Everett built a fence around the eastern side, not to keep people out, but to mark the line where fear stopped and freedom began. One night Clara found Everett sitting on the porch, watching the stars. They still looking for us, you think? She asked. Maybe, he said, but not here, not anymore. She sat beside him. You ever miss it, the quiet? He looked at her, then at the window behind them where Jacob and Emmy slept tangled in quilts, feet sticking out like wild roots. No, he said. She smiled. Time passed. The land changed. And so did they. Clara found a place in the center of it all, not just as the one who had survived, but the one who made sure others did too. She taught the children, helped birth two more. When someone asked if she'd always been a teacher, she laughed and said, "No, but I've always known how to run toward fire." Everett became the kind of man people looked to. Not because he demanded it, but because he listened when no one else would. When crops failed, he found wild herbs. When storms came, he gave shelter. And when a man once arrived asking too many questions with a badge that didn't shine right, Everett met him at the edge of the ridge and sent him back down the trail with no answers, only a scar. One morning, years later, Jacob rode out beyond the ridge alone. When he came back, he brought 10 more. Families, children, people with nothing but names and stories that no longer fit in the towns they came from. Clara stood on the porch that night, watching the campfires rise. "This is what we built," she said softly. Everett stepped beside her, "and they'll build more." She looked at him. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found me that night by the tracks?" He didn't answer right away, just stared at the fire. "Then no." "Why not?" "Because I did." And she smiled. The wind shifted, the sky deepened, and from the porch of a cabin built by two people who had nothing left but each other, the world felt wide again. Not safe, but honest. And that was enough.